everyone. How's it going? Welcome back to the Infatuasian podcast. Thanks again for joining us today. Now, I didn't intentionally plan these episodes around AAPI Heritage Month, but they kind of are lining up that way. And so we're going to talk a little more history today. We're going to talk specifically Chinese American history. And for those of you who aren't Chinese American, I think you'll still find this discussion interesting. Speaking of which, actually brought in someone who's not Chinese American. It is our friend across the pond. It is Zoe. She's back for her second episode. Welcome back, Zoe.
Thanks so much for having me again. I'm excited to be here.
Hey, I have the question for you. Is it impolite to call someone a mank?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
For Mancunian. Yeah, no, I would happily accept that.
Actually, I didn't even tell you that I had just learned the term Mancunian the other day.
Oh, really?
On that episode, I looked it up. I was like, what do you call someone from Manchester?
Yeah.
And they said you can call a Mancunian or a mank. But
yeah, proud Mancunian.
mank sound... Okay, yeah, it was probably a little more
Mank is
formal.
fine as well.
So it's Zoe back from Manchester. Hey, I just saw that you soft launched your book website.
I did. I soft launched it because it's not entirely finished. I've got hundreds more titles to add to it, but I think it will take me forever. So I thought I'd better just get it out there. And
get it out there.
Yeah, see how it goes.
And so do you ship only to the EU right now, or UK and EU?
Do you know what? There is a facility to do international deliveries, but I'd have to work it out within the individuals because the postage would be so different. So at the moment, just shipping to UK.
Okay, just UK. All right, so everyone go check out juniperbythesea.com. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
All right. And actually, I just heard that you'll be stocking Sarah's book.
I am.
Very, very soon.
I will be because I loved it.
Okay,
yeah, I can't wait to talk about it. I've been really excited.
Okay, yeah. So let's go ahead and get into that. We have another guest here. She is joining us. Well, actually, I'll get to that in a second. So we have another guest with us. It is Sarah-SoonLing Blackburn. She's an educator, speaker, professional learning facilitator, and now an author. She's a classic third culture kid. We'll talk about that more in a second. And Sarah was also a teacher, teaching third and fourth graders. Her new book is part of a young readers nonfiction series called Race to the Truth, and her installment is called Race to the Truth, Exclusion, and the Chinese American Story. So, yay! Thanks for joining us today, Sarah.
It's so great to be here with you, Curtis and Zoe. I can't wait for this conversation.
Yeah, we've been really looking forward to this. Where are you calling in from today?
So I'm calling in from Oxford, Mississippi, which is home for me now. Yeah.
Oxford, Mississippi. Is it a big city? Because I've never heard of it.
It's not. If you college sports fans know it because it's the home of the University of Mississippi or Ole Miss.
Okay.
So it's like a small college town. Yeah. Population gets much smaller when school's not in session, that kind of thing.
Yeah. How's the weather out there? Are you getting hot this time of year?
It is hot. We had to turn on the air conditioning this week, which,
wow.
Yeah, in April is early, but
I've been freezing today. It's very different.
It's very different.
You know, I have a short story. I'll save this for later. But my grandfather, my gong gong, lived in Mississippi for a minute. I'll tell you that story later. Yeah, I don't know much about it.
I can't wait to hear it.
Yeah,
okay.
Well, I wish I knew more about it, but I got to ask my mom a little bit more about it. But yeah. Okay, so we like to greet our guests in the Asian way. So let's see, Zoe, it is 9:37 over there.
Yeah, I had dinner a long time ago.
Sarah, you're late afternoon over there. So I'm going to ask you, have you eaten yet?
Well, for me, it's that weird time between lunch and dinner. So, where you say like, yes, but also no, because usually I feel like that question comes right after the meal or right before, right before you mean to eat again. But,
yeah. You got a lot of good food choices down in Oxford?
Oh, the food is so good. Yeah.
Really?
Southern food is delicious. And Oxford's definitely a food town. So y'all come on down here. Southern hospitality is real.
Okay, all right. I don't have Oxford on my list just yet, but you can convince me. I can definitely be persuaded.
I can sell. I am a college town evangelist now. I have become completely sold, so it won't take much for me to get y'all to come.
Okay, all right. Oh, we got a couple y'alls too. I like that.
I can't help it. It took me several years before it entered my vocabulary, but now it's just there, and I love it. It's a good gender neutral collective second person pronoun. So
yeah. Well, we use it all over America, but with just little slightly different variations of y'all.
That's right.
Yeah. Zoe, have you eaten yet?
I had dinner a while ago, so no, I think,
Okay.
yeah, not for the
We're
rest of the
getting
night now.
we're getting into midnight snack territory.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe that after the podcast, if I'm
Okay,
peckish.
yeah. In Cantonese, what do we say? Su, yeah? You get a little.
Yes.
All right. Well, excited to talk to you guys today. We are going to talk a little bit about Sarah's background. So, Sarah, I like this intro that you wrote. You wrote this letter. Did you feel kind of compelled to write this letter before your book, or kind of as a preface for your book?
Yeah, I think I wrote it about halfway through because I was just wrestling with all of these like internal emotions about what's in the letter, really, which is like
Yeah.
my own identity or where Chinese Americans fit within like broader Asian America and then like even broader America within that. And I was like,
Uh-huh.
you know what? If I'm having all these questions and feelings, maybe the reader might be having questions and feelings too. So let me just get this out of the way and kind of front load it. And
Yeah.
that made the rest of the process so much easier.
Okay.
Yeah.
So some of the things you mentioned was your background. Do you mind going into that a little bit? So where were you born?
Okay. I was born in Bangkok, Thailand. I am not
Okay.
Thai. And my dad was an American diplomat.
Okay.
That's where Blackburn comes from. That's my father's name. So he was actually, we trace our ancestry on my dad's side to the Quaker John Blackburn, who left
Oh,
Ireland and,
Wow.
17, whatever. And I think technically I would qualify for like the Daughters of the American Revolution, which is
okay.
like a very weird
Wow.
thing to realize.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because, I very much identify as Asian American or
Mm-hmm.
Asian. I grew up mostly in Asia. My mom is Malaysian Chinese.
Okay.
I was born in Thailand. We lived in Malaysia, Japan, China when I was growing up. Um, and yeah, that was like my upbringing. My identity was going
Mm.
between all these different East Asian, Southeast Asian countries and
Yeah.
places. My mom's family is still mostly in Malaysia. And so, that was like home in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
ways, was like going back and forth there. So then having this like very dual identity is um, interesting. I mean, my first name, right, is Sarah-SoonLing with a hyphen in it.
Yeah.
And I
Uh-huh.
often say, like, I really relate to that hyphen because it's
Uh,
holding on to the two different parts of who I
Oh,
yeah.
am. And yet it all exists at once, right? Like
yeah.
my parents had the foresight to put that in on my birth certificate. It's my
Mm.
legal
Yeah.
first name. But it captures the fact that we can have like so many pieces of who we are.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
No,
love that.
great. Yeah. And Zoe, I don't think we got into this last time. So
Mm.
your parents are from Hong Kong?
Yeah, so I was born here in the UK and grew up here, but my family are from Hong Kong, and I've still got lots of extended family there as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
So
yeah,
you call yourself, like, I think officially you're called second
second
generation.
generation. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Yeah. By
So
the by our US census, we call that second
yeah,
generation, I think.
yeah, I think we
So,
probably call that the same here as well.
yeah. Okay. So do you relate to some of the we'll talk about this more, of course, but do you
Mm.
relate to a lot of the Chinese American history at all, or
Yes and no. I think, reading the book, it really prompted me to do a bit more digging because knew a little bit before about the sort of Chinese history in the
Mhm.
UK, but it does definitely there are stark differences. And
Mhm.
so I think a lot of it had filtered through into my subconscious just from a lot of popular media, from films and books that had
Mhm.
mentioned Chinese American history. So I sort of had a brief understanding, but so yes and no. I think a lot of the feeling
Mhm.
is the same, right? That kind of sense of
Sure. Yeah.
alienation, of feeling, distant from a lot of the things around you. That seems pretty universal, that feeling. So it
Yeah.
was so
Yeah.
interesting reading that.
Yeah. And the Chinese British history probably goes back just as far. Yeah. 1800s,
Yeah,
I would
looking
guess.
at it, I
Yeah.
think it just doesn't seem to be anywhere near as extensive in terms of volume of
Mhm.
like numbers of people.
Mm.
I was having a look. I don't know if now is a good time to bring it up, but uh, I think broadly from a census a few years back, what the Chinese population in the UK is just under 500,000.
Mm.
It's about under 1% of the UK population, which seems
Under one.
ratio-wise similar maybe to the
Mhm.
US.
Mhm.
But the US, I think, there's 5 million Chinese
Okay.
American.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You probably reach a critical mass of people, even if it's the race, the percentage is still low.
Yeah, yeah. And so, Sarah, when you were growing up, were you in international schools?
Mostly, yeah, especially when we were overseas.
Did you call yourself American, or how did you identify as a kid?
I think as a kid, because I grew up around other kids who had similar backgrounds. So, the kids of military or diplomats and like from all over the world, not just Americans.
Yeah.
We didn't, we would like say our nationality. So yes, American, but it was like more understood that would just be one piece. And it would be like, you might have all of these different components and your dad might be from here, your mom might be from here, and you've lived in these 10 different places. Yeah. And it wasn't until coming back to the States permanently for high school that I had to, confront that question, that where are you from question a little bit more and realize that people don't want an essay, right? When they ask you that, they want a simple answer.
Right.
And I still don't know exactly what the simple answer is, but I think I was very fortunate to grow up around other kids who also didn't have a simple answer. Yeah.
But you end up in the deep South.
I know.
What made you? I'm just curious. I don't want to make any judgments or anything, but of all places, so you've lived all over the world. Thailand, China, Japan. Of all the places you lived, you end up in Oxford, Mississippi. How'd you end up down there?
So I also probably would never have expected to end up in the deep South. I came down. So first I moved to Arkansas, just across the river in the Arkansas part of the Mississippi Delta region, which is a very rural part of the United States, after college. So I had a teaching degree. This was also 2009 is when I graduated from college. And, it was like the financial crisis and wondering what to do with life and everything. So anyway, I came here and I was teaching and I really enjoyed it, but it never seemed like it was going to be permanent. And so I actually went to the UK. I went to London to do my master's degree. But it was while I was there that I think that sometimes it takes leaving a place to really get a critical perspective on where you just were.
Yeah.
And while I was there, I was studying social justice and education. That's what my MA is in. And I could not stop thinking about the rural deep South. It was like all I wanted to write about, all I wanted to research, all I wanted to do. And so after the program ended, I was like, okay, I have to go back. And that was 12 years ago now. Yeah. And so it feels good, even though I grew up in all these big cities, like living in the deep South. I really love it. And I had all these preconceived notions about it that were, I'll say, mostly negative. And some of those things are very much true. And there's also so much that I didn't know about that's true also. That's really beautiful.
All right.
Pretty nice.
Now, I don't want to cause any trouble here, but I think you guys might have gone to rival universities in the UK. We won't stir it up just right now, but later on there may be some issues. But all right, so Race to the Truth. How did you get involved with this? So just to let people know, this is a series of 5 books right now. I would imagine there's more on the way.
I think so.
Race to the Truth is a middle grade. What would you say about like 5th,
like
6th
10,
grade?
11, 12 years old. Yeah.
Okay, I got one of those at home. So it's a middle grade book series. There's about 5 books so far, and so each one of them deals with kind of let's just say it, ugly parts of American history. There's one about colonization of indigenous peoples. There's one about slavery. There's one about the borderlands with Mexico. And then yours is about exclusion and the Chinese American story. So how did you get involved? And what did you think when you heard them pitch this to you? Hey, we're going to write a kid's book about these really terrible moments in history. Yeah. What did you think?
Yeah, so I was asked to submit a writing sample. I think they were looking for an author for a book on Chinese American history because they wanted the series to be from people who have lived experience from these backgrounds, which is not always the way that these history stories are told, especially for kids. And I don't know, I think it was like a combination both of, having the background knowledge, but also the fact that I worked with 3rd and 4th graders mostly, being able to tell the story in a voice that a kid could grasp, even though, like you said, it's often hard to learn. And so that was definitely one of the challenges starting out, because the brief is basically like, we want you to write a book that's really honest and unflinching about racism, but also make it really fun for kids to read.
Right.
Like, oh, okay. Gosh, how am I going to do that? And so, how successfully that happens, like, you all can be the judge. But it was both a challenge, and also, I think at the end of the day, gave me a lot of hope, because even though I was writing these very difficult things, because I was thinking about, how can a kid read this and not just feel crushed by hopelessness or crushed by frustration? It made me seek out stories of like resistance, resilience, of community to weave throughout. And it's something I repeat in the book, but I think it's so true. It's like, anytime we see stories of oppression, of prejudice, of racism, we will also see stories of people who have resisted throughout history. It's another reason I love living in the Deep South, right? Like, the story of the Deep South in a lot of ways is one of deep inequality. And yet there is a deep history of resistance that comes out of the Deep South as well, right? And so that's like a similar thing that I found in our communities, that we too have long histories of resistance, of organizing, of community. And so even though like the title is Exclusion, I think it's a book about belonging at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I really loved it. I definitely, reading the history and the way you told it, I felt a sense of empowerment through, because just finding out that information, and your tone is so gentle, and I think it's deceptively simple to think of it as a children's book. It's a book I'm actually going to read again very much, because I really enjoyed it. You do tell in a really captivating way. I love that you tell the history, but also you've got individual stories that, the kind of reader can grasp onto. So it's pitched really well, but I love the depth and the nuance that you managed to convey. So I found it incredible. Yeah.
Gosh, thanks, Zoe. I know it means a lot that you said nuance too, because that is tricky. A lot of people think that kids or young readers can't handle nuance, but you can't tell these stories without it. I mean, it's not just this or this. There's so much like mess and both and it was sometimes hard to figure out how to make that understandable for a younger audience, but that was definitely a goal, because you want kids to grow up realizing that not everything is that straightforward.
I was excited that this book now exists for children, because for me, this is sort of so symbolic of progress, to think that, oh gosh, younger people will have access to this at an early age when they are forming these ideas and they're forming the characters and the people they want to be. And to have access to that is, that's really, really special. So,
And I'll throw in too that we keep saying it's for kids, but I think adults would very much like this book too.
I learned so much.
Yeah, for sure. So everyone out there, don't turn us off just because you don't have an 11-year-old floating around your house. I think this, because Zoe was saying that she's seen a big textbook on this stuff before, but it's so intimidating and it's so academic. Most of us are not going to willingly pick that book up. But for this, it's paperback, it's handheld, it's very, very doable. It's got pictures that are great. So I'm gonna recommend this for everyone. I don't care how old you are, but if you want to learn a little bit about Chinese American history, I'm gonna really recommend this book.
100%, because you cover issues about racial justice at large as well. That so again transcends sort of the history of Asian Americans. It's relevant for me, and brilliant resource.
Hey, can we talk a little bit about the book?
Yeah, let's get into the book.
I mean, I don't think we have to give a spoiler alert because this is history, right? So it should be out there. We don't want to ruin the ending for anyone, but yeah, we can talk a little bit about the book. You know what? I've heard of this story before. And Sarah, you want to describe a little bit about who Hui Shen could have been?
So there's the idea that this Chinese monk named Hui Shen left China around 499, the year 499. Right. A long time ago, and sailed across the ocean, spent time among the people that he encountered. It came back and wrote about it. And in sort of studying these materials and his writings, there are some scholars who are like, oh, he went to America. This is actually the first, before Columbus, before Eric the Red, like actually it was us. And I don't know. It's like Chinese people, we're often like, my mom is like, we invented pasta. We invented, like the Italians stole that from us. Like we want to be there first. And it's kind of a version of that thing. Because there's people who say like, oh, it's obvious he went to the West Coast of what's now the US. But there are other people who read his writings like, oh, it's obvious he went to Mexico. Or, oh, it's obvious he went to the Middle East. Like, who knows? One, where he went, and two, if he even did that, right? Because we don't have like verifying evidence of this. But it is definitely a story that gets repeated. And I have seen it told as truth in some places. But you just have to do a little bit of digging and you immediately see like, oh, this is probably not true at all.
Fun to think about though, definitely. Yeah. I actually stumbled across a book and it looked really old and it looked really authentic about this guy. And I think someone had found like a bronze plate with some Chinese characters, like somewhere in like Fresno, California or something like that. And I thought that was cool to think about, but I don't know if there's very much evidence for that. But you do have the real story of Hong Noi, who was a real person and is kind of a sad tale, but still so fascinating. What can you tell us about Afang?
Yeah, so this is the first record that we have of a Chinese woman in the United States. She was a teenager. We don't know too much about her. She's probably from Guangdong province. A lot of what we can infer about her is because she had bound feet, which becomes a big part of the story. Yeah. So that lets us know that she was probably from the merchant class, because at the time, people who were from poorer working backgrounds, like women wouldn't have bound their feet. Feet binding was also less common in southern China than in northern China. But it seems like her family fell on hard times. And for some reason, either she was like sold to these American merchants or she decided to go with them or something. She ends up getting on a ship with the captain Benjamin Aubert and these two brothers, the Carnes brothers, who were trying to sell Chinese goods to the wealthy elite of the East Coast of the United States. This is in the early 1800s. And they were having a hard time selling their things because people were like, what is this stuff? Like, we don't know how to use this furniture. This is very strange. And they were like, oh, if we get a real Chinese woman to come help sell the stuff, maybe it'll sell. And they very quickly realized that actually people just were interested in seeing her, that they could make more money just selling tickets to see her. So they brought her around as like an exhibit. Something that people found really interesting was her feet, right? Like they would write about it in newspapers, or wow, this like, look at the Chinese lady, this exotic, strange thing. She eventually ends up in P.T. Barnum's circus. And so it's a very troubling story, but it also has a lot of resonances, I think, through today, this exoticization, this perpetual foreigner thing, even though it seems likely that she lived out the rest of her life in the US. She never fully became American. She never belonged. It's a really sad story. And it's also in some ways, I don't know, hopeful is not the right word, but I think about her a lot. I think about this teenager in a new land, and I don't know.
Super fascinating. I agree with you. Yeah, it's sad, but there's something about it that, like, props to her, right? To have the courage. I don't know how willing she was, but just to survive. She's a survivor. She made best of whatever she could, I'm sure. So.
I love at one point you reference the archaeological findings as a feed, that had been eaten in these places, which definitely adds a layer of texture to the story.
Yeah, I mean, we're Asian American. Like, we start with, did you eat yet? Right. So learning about all the bones, like all the different birds that they were eating and the bones, and like so much pork. When they were like, we found the remains of so much pork. It's like, oh, this makes so much sense.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, not much has changed. Actually, I was going to ask, so much of this early part of the book takes place in San Francisco. So this part of the book for me is very personal and very interesting because we're talking about the 1800s in San Francisco mostly. And one interesting story. So I heard this from my grandmother, who was third generation, according to our definition. So her grandmother came over, and she said that her grandmother was one of the first women over here, and she came kind of on a whim. Like, there was another girl. So my grandmother was like 17. My great-grandmother was 17, and some other girl, I say girl because she was probably 16 or 17, was supposed to come over and marry my great-great-grandfather, who was like 40. So he was like a middle-aged guy. Well, maybe not middle-aged. Young middle-aged person, 40-something, maybe even 50. And this girl backed out at the last minute. And she said, I don't want to go. And my great-great-grandmother stepped in and said, I'll go. And so she came to San Francisco to marry my great-great-grandfather. And they had kids right away, like 1879. So my great-grandparents were born in like 1879, and that kind of started the line here in San Francisco. So props to her. I cannot imagine a 17-year-old. I have a 14-year-old at home. I can't imagine her just saying, "Hey, I'm gonna go to a country on a a 3-mile boat, 3-month boat ride to come to a foreign land where I don't know any of the language. I'm gonna marry a 45-year-old guy." Like, that's crazy to me. It's so wild.
Yeah. What a great story.
Yeah.
And a few things that stand out in that story for the broader context of the time is one, so she must have come prior to the Chinese,
right.
Well, she did come prior to the Chinese Exclusion Act. Yeah. And even the Page Act, which really focused on excluding Chinese women prior to the Chinese Exclusion Act. So there were very few, like the ratio I think I saw at one point was like 90-1 or something. I don't know how accurate that is, but it's very, very, very few women compared to how many men were in the United States. And most of the women who did come were coming for marriage or for other activities with men that would have also brought them over, which is part of where the negative stereotypes came from. But the other thing that stands out from that story, like you said, imagining a 17-year-old choosing to do this really brings into focus just how difficult life was in that region of China at the time. What conditions have you been facing? Like, what life would have been in front of her for her to say, you know what, let me just get on this ship where a lot of people didn't survive the journey or it was, really miserable. Let me just do this and marry this older dude I've never seen before. Like, that sounds better than whatever was is back there. Right. Whatever's ahead of you. Like, that really puts it into sharp focus.
Yeah. And this is the tale of thousands. And you had the numbers in your book. So there was like, before 1850, there were like 45 Chinese people in America, the whole country. And then after, like, between 1850 and 1870, something like 60,000, or do you have the numbers?
Yeah, it jumps up. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, so this is a big fail, fail. No. I've tried to keep so many dates and numbers in my head.
But it's tens of thousands.
But it jumps, tens of thousands. Mostly in the California gold rush is what starts it off. Yeah.
Which was also a big fail, right? Like, most of the guys that came over looking for gold barely made anything, and
didn't make anything.
And they were probably so ashamed or so discouraged they signed up for the railroad after that, because at least that was steady work.
Well, and they didn't have a lot of options. Like, a lot of them owed money to lenders who had helped pay for their journey over to the United States, and they couldn't afford to go back, so they're just stuck here with, like, and what are you going to do? So somebody wants to employ you, even though the railroad jobs were awful and really low paid. Again, it's one of those things, like the lesser of two evils. What are your choices? And so, that's what happened.
And so I drive to Tahoe sometimes, I'm like going skiing, and sometimes we get stuck in traffic there, and I'm miserable because I'm like, I'm stuck in traffic. It's going to take me 3 hours, and it's cold. But I'm inside my car with my Patagonia, a puffer on, and I'm looking outside the window, and I think, man, the guys that had to build that railroad on those hills through the Sierra Nevadas, they didn't have Patagonia. They were in cotton, they were in Levi's,
Right.
they were just in terrible, equipment, terrible conditions, barely got fed. They had to buy their own food, even though they were out there in the middle of nowhere. They took some of their wages to buy the food. They were using black powder to blast granite. And I think in your book, you're talking about they were doing 14 inches a day. And then they were super excited about, hey, we got up to 22 inches a day. Like, that's a good day for all these guys blasting holes through the Sierra Nevadas. What kinds of things did you uncover about working in the railroads?
That was one that I wanted because it is one of the few stories that people might have heard.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I talk to adults, I'm like, "What did you learn about Asian Americans?" They'll say Japanese internment, and they'll say like maybe the railroads, like they built the railroads, but that's it. So it was one that I really wanted to get into, like what a day in the life was like. That idea of like chipping the stone, realizing you're trying to build a tunnel through this massive mountain. Like you said, when you see them in real life, it's like inconceivable. To think about doing it with nothing but hand tools and some, low power explosive. So that was huge. One thing that I didn't really know about at all was the 1867 worker strike, which some newspapers have called the largest labor action of its time. This idea of we think of these people as like passive, and I even said, like, imagine what choices they had, that they didn't have a lot of choices. But they still had dignity. They still had a sense of right and wrong. They still had a sense of justice. They still had a sense of their humanity and wanting to do something about it. And that's a super important story to tell too. It's not just that they were kind of pawns in these railroad tycoons games. They wanted to advocate. And the image of like all of these Chinese railroad workers on the same day laying down their tools and going to sit down up and down the track, like, it gives me chills to think about that because of how hard the organizing must have been to make that happen, how brave they must have been to do it. And also it's not a happy ending. Again, it didn't really work, but we still celebrate the story because it shows the humanity, the strength, the resistance that was there, even in the face of all of this prejudice that they experienced and danger, literal physical danger that they were
literally
facing every
hungry.
day.
That was kind of a poignant but sad line where you say ultimately it was their hunger that they just got starved to death and they just had to give in. But they say that history is written by the victors, right? Typically, but it's good to have this point now where we can write the history, even if this wasn't, a victory. It's still a story to tell, and it's still cool. All right.
I loved because you honored that, you honored their skill, and because actually you talk about how they constructed the railroad really fast, and that was really striking to read. And I loved how you sort of honoring their skill and speed and the strength of what they did. They're not just these people who have been, they were treated as the lowest of the low at the time.
Right.
And to honor them with that and restoring their kind of dignity through that description of them, I really appreciated that.
Well, they were, people said like, oh, we don't want to hire Chinese people to do the railroad. Like, they're so wimpy, they're so weak. We've heard these stereotypes before. And then look, they were so good at it.
Record breaking. Yeah, very cool. All right, and then I love the fact that you kind of did, like you said, kind of most people might know a little bit about the San Francisco history, but then you get into a little bit of Hawaii and the Deep South.
That's right.
Shout out Mississippi. So you talk about the cotton, and I didn't put two and two together where the end of the Civil War, so there's going to be a big need for labor. And then, the Chinese are looking for jobs. They're coming to this country looking for jobs. So you had maybe a little mini influx of Chinese labor going to the South and other parts of the country. What do you know about the cotton trade with Chinese labor?
Yeah, so I have found stories of Chinese Americans across the country going to work in field labor. And then, yes, like personal bias. If I was going to spotlight one of those stories, I wanted to tell the story of my new state, of my home now. But part of it too is when I first moved, I told you I moved to a town in the Arkansas Delta. When I first moved to this town, I was like driving in, and there's a lake, and there are all these different docks along the lake, and one of them had like a pagoda on the dock, and I was like, "What in the world is happening?" So I pull over, and I'm like looking at this pagoda dock, and this man comes out of his house, this Asian man, and he starts talking to me in the thickest
Southern drawl,
Southern accent I had ever heard in my life. And I was like, what in the world is happening? Anyway, so his family owned a grocery store in the town, but they had been there for a very, very long time. And that was my first encounter of, oh my gosh, of course there are Asian people, of course there are Chinese people, not just in the places that we think of, like San Francisco, or maybe New York City, that actually, maybe not in the same numbers, but throughout the United States, you'll find lots of different stories. And I wanted to uncover and look at those patterns as well. So it also was a way for me to tell the relationship between, you can't tell the story of Chinese America without telling the story of Black America. Like Black history runs through American history. And there's a lot, back to Zoe's word, nuance. There's a lot of nuance in that relationship, because so often these groups have been treated as in opposition to each other, sometimes have actively opposed each other, or pulled each other down, sometimes have worked together and seen the similarities in our struggles. I'm not in any way trying to conflate the two experiences, but if we're saying that there is a racial hierarchy that tries to divide communities or to keep people from always seeing some of our shared interests. These are two groups, Asian Americans and Black Americans in particular, that are so often held up as never getting along or always having issues. And to tell why that narrative is there. So to tell yes, there really have been issues, and to point out that is because there is a wealthy, typically white elite that has created conditions that are keeping these communities in competition. That's really complicated to tell to an 11-year-old reader, right? So how do you find the story of a place, of an industry, cotton, the Mississippi River, these things that we have in our collective consciousness, and use that to illustrate all of these nuances, and then to tell the stories of some individuals, including a young girl in the Mississippi Delta, to help tell that story as well.
Yeah, I love it. So here's my little story, which I don't know much about. So my grandfather, so not the line that came in the 1800s, my grandfather came here in 1918 to San Francisco, and he probably was a paper son that I would guess, surmise. And whoever received him sent him to Mississippi. They said, "Hey, we're gonna send you to some cousin or uncle in Mississippi." And so my grandfather moved out there for about 3 months and said, "Nope." It must have been hard labor. It must have been something that involved some labor. And he came back to San Francisco, and he lived the rest of his life out in San Francisco. Wow. But yeah, he came over as I think he was 12 when he was over there, and it was not for him. So he came right back to San Francisco after that.
I would love to learn more about his story and where he was and what he was doing. But yeah, we can probably infer it was hard labor or some kind of domestic servitude.
Well, he came back. He was a houseboy. He came back to San Francisco, but he's like, you know what? I'd rather be a houseboy in Chinatown, San Francisco, or Nob Hill, San Francisco, than on some bayou.
Yeah, that's real.
And then my grandfather on my dad's side. So my dad was born in Edgemont, South Dakota, which is no one's ever heard of it. It's like population 800 because it's a whistle stop. It was a train stop on the railroad. And so they built a little Chinese restaurant there for people to get off the train, have a little Chinese food, and get back on the train and keep heading east. So for some reason, my dad was born in South Dakota. There weren't a lot of Chinese people. There still aren't a lot of Chinese people in South Dakota, but my dad was out there. So
well, there's Chinese food everywhere. And that was something so interesting in writing it, was how quickly Chinese food, and particularly the chop suey craze, spread across the country, that, people couldn't get enough of this food, even as they didn't necessarily accept Chinese people. But at the same time, it was a way for, and we still see this today. The newer immigrants coming from China in particular, like mostly work in the restaurant business, and that there's like whole bus networks and transportation systems, and people will, you'll work at somebody's restaurant until you earn enough money to move to a new small town and open your own restaurant. And that's that's the pattern. Because, who doesn't love Chinese food?
Who doesn't love Chinese food? All across America, Zoe, you got to get out here. Zoe's never been to the United States.
Zoe, you have to come visit.
I really want to. It astonishes me how big it is compared to the UK.
True, yeah. I mean, you're coming to Boston in a few weeks or so.
Yeah, hopefully. I haven't... But I still haven't made the firm plans, but yes.
But unfortunately, Oxford and San Francisco are not quite driving distance for a day trip.
I didn't think it looked like it.
Next time, you got to come out to the West Coast, and we'll get you out to Oxford too.
That's right.
All right. So the latter part, I don't know if it's the latter part, but a big chunk of the book, obviously the title's called Exclusion. You had to talk about these laws, and there's no way around it. These laws were straight up racist. These were just basically, it's called the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. Like literally, we're making a law to make it illegal, whatever that means, to come to this country if you are Chinese. That was crazy if you think about it. Like, it just blows my mind that they just put it in words like that.
Yep. Yeah, it's the only time we've had legislation on the book that explicitly bans an entire ethnic group by name.
Right.
It's just like straight up is what it says it is.
Yeah. I mean, the Geary Act, the Page Act, a little more vague, a little more subtle, but the Chinese Exclusion Act literally just says you can't come here. That's kind of wrong. Can you even imagine what this country would look like if we didn't have that act? Like we said, 5 million Chinese Americans. What would it be if we didn't even have that act? Because
I mean, it's interesting because when we talk about immigration today and our thinking about the border or immigrant detention, deportation, all of U.S. Border Patrol, I didn't realize until just maybe 10 years ago how much that system was built on the way that this country thought about Chinese Americans in the 1800s. That the legal precedents for immigrant detention, immigrant deportation, for saying who can come and who can't come. But if you think about it, like we probably would have had a lot more people coming in. And there are people who definitely would have thought that was a bad thing. Sure. But there are also people who would have thought that that was a great thing because we see all the contributions that the people who were here were able to make to our society.
Yeah, I think both of my grandparents, well, again, I think they're probably paper sons, but both of my grandfathers were born in China because their father had come to America, well, allegedly on paper, right? They had come to America in the 1800s before 1882, but couldn't find a wife here. So they had to go back to China to have kids, and then they came back, that generation came back in the 1910s, 1920s, allegedly. So I don't know if my last name actually is Chin. It may not be Chin. I might be something totally different. But
isn't it so interesting how that happens?
Who am I? I don't even know. We're running out of time a little bit. I think I just want to encourage people to read this book, like we'll leave it on a cliffhanger a little bit. You have to read the book to find out more. There's so many more people. We talk about Vincent Chin. We talk about Anna May Wong, a little Martha Lum in there, maybe a Toyland Good in there. There's so many different stories in there, and I think you'll enjoy it no matter what age you are. But you should definitely share it with your kids because we're getting a little better with our history in schools. We have ethnic studies here in California now, so that's good. But I think a lot of this is not going to be taught in schools, so it's great to have this resource called Race to the Truth. So thanks for writing this book, Sarah.
Thank you for having me, Curtis.
Oh, yeah. No, my pleasure. But you're not done yet. No, wait, don't go anywhere yet.
Okay, I'm not going anywhere. I'm just loving this conversation.
Yeah, I really am too. So anyone out there, I think, and as Zoe was said, even if you're not American and even if you're not Chinese, I think you'll enjoy this book.
Yeah, I'm gonna read it again.
Yeah, actually, and it's not hard to get. You can get it on pretty much wherever you get books. It's only $8.99, which is cheap for a book. Little paperback reader that you have on your shelf. I'm definitely gonna get one. I think I'm gonna get the whole series because it seems like stuff that I may not have heard about. I'm a kid from the 80s, right? So I don't have all this stuff in my. We didn't have ethnic studies in the 80s when I went to school, so I think it's gonna be great to catch up on all these. So Sarah-SoonLing, you have survived our tough questions, but are you ready for our lightning round?
Okay.
All right, Zoe, you want to do some of these?
Yeah. We want to know what's the best part about being Chinese or your identity in general?
I think, it's having family all over the world. So we have the Chinese diaspora.
Yeah.
And so, cousins everywhere.
That's great. And now we have a place to stay in Oxford, Mississippi, Zoe.
That's right.
All right. So we always talk about food in here. So in your travels, where's the place that you feel like you get comfort food from?
Oh gosh, that's definitely Malaysia. Malaysian food is it's so many different cultures, foods all blended together.
Yeah.
And when I get off the plane, I just start eating until I leave.
It's like one of the original fusions, right? You got South Asian, you got Chinese, you got Southeast Asian. Yeah, that's great.
That's right.
Okay,
If you could have a meal with anyone from your book, who would you eat rice with?
I'm a little bit obsessed with Mabel Pinghua-Lee. She's the teenager who was an advocate for women's rights as well as for Chinese and Asian people's rights. And I'm so interested in youth activism. And so I want to talk to her and learn more about her story and maybe fangirl a little bit.
How old was she?
She was 16 at most of the events in the book. Yeah.
Wow. Very cool. All right. And since we have we have an author and a bookshop owner with us here today, I want to pick your brain a little bit. Do you have any recommendations? It could be fiction or nonfiction for books that we should read about any topic. Doesn't have to be the topic we're talking about today.
So my friend just mailed me the book Severance.
By Ling Ma.
By Ling Ma, which I'm not quite done with. I'm about 75% of the way through, but I am loving it. It is, the modern capitalist, millennial condition mixed with displaced Chinese, Asian American identity mixed with a pandemic and zombies. She wrote this book prior to COVID, so a lot of it feels very prescient. But it's super enjoyable and deeply emotional at the same time.
And zombies, did you say?
Yeah, and zombies. Yeah. Pandemic, zombies, millennial condition, identity crises. It's got it all.
Nice. All right, Zoe, you got a book rec for us?
Yeah, I do actually. I was thinking about this. It is, to be honest, slightly relevant. It's a book I feel really strongly about, Chinese Whispers by a Taiwanese journalist called Xiao Hongpai. She a book's pretty special. She went undercover into the undocumented Chinese migrants in the UK and talks and shares about their lives and, unfortunately, their exploitation in the British labour market. So it's a brilliant book. Really recommend that.
Okay, but not a light read.
No, it does. I probably cried every other chapter reading that.
Yeah.
It sounds so
It's a
good.
really important book.
Yeah. I just grabbed a book. There's this new shop down in Chinatown called On Waverly. I think we might do an episode down there. But just grabbed a book called Three Coins. Have you guys heard of that one? Russell Lowe, and he kind of traces. I just picked it up, so I don't know much about it, but traces the life of a young woman who came to San Francisco and was put into the brothel, and her life and getting out of it. And he traces it. He traces her life from the 1800s to as far as he can go on that. So it's pretty cool. Russell Lowe's Three Coins is a book that I want to get into. All right. Well, that does it for those questions. But Sarah, we like to end by asking our signature question: who is your infatuasian? An infatuasian is anyone in the Asian community, living or deceased, that you admire. It could be someone you know or someone that you admire from afar. So Sarah-SoonLing, who is your infatuasian?
Okay, I spent a lot of time thinking about this, Curtis, and I was like, I should have a really profound, deep, like intellectual answer, but I can't do it because I'm just, going to shoot my shot and put this name out there and see. And that is the great Daniel Day Kim, because we are both graduates of the wonderful Haverford College, but he graduated several years before me, and so I have never met him, but I want to be like, no, we went to the same school. That means we can hang out.
Yeah, of course.
But I admire how he has taken his platform. He's a very intelligent, person, as well as being a great actor and not too hard to look at. But he's taken that and really used it to focus on issues, on Asian American issues, on other things that matter. And so, in a world where oftentimes I feel like our celebrity worship is a little bit, just on the more cosmetic or vapid end of things. I really appreciate and admire the way he shows up for our community as well. And go Black Squirrels.
Yeah, Black Squirrels. And I really admire him too for taking that stand on the pay for Hawaii Five-0. He and Grace Park just said, this is not right. We're stars of this show. People watch the show because of us. And, and that was really cool. And currently in Avatar, The Last Airbender on Netflix, and we're shout out to this podcast. We're doing an episode with one of the actresses from that show coming up soon. Well, actually, might have aired already, but we're going to talk to someone. So stay tuned for that. But hey, today you're our Infatuasian, Sarah. Thank you for coming on the show with us.
Thank you so much, Curtis. Thank you, Zoe. It was such a pleasure to
chat to you.
Yeah, we could have gone a couple more hours, but it's going to be midnight pretty soon for Zoe, so we don't want to go too far. But everyone out there, go get a copy of Sarah's book. You can get it pretty much anywhere you get books. It's called Exclusion and the Chinese American Story. It's part of a series called Race to the Truth. Like we said, very affordable. You can get it at most places you get books. So you know where to find that. You can get it even if you don't have kids.
Right.
All right. And again, Zoe, thanks for helping us out. You're welcome back anytime. We want to talk about things that you're interested in. You're welcome back anytime.
Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Of course. And go check out Juniper C Books on Instagram, or you can go to her new softly launched. So how many titles you got on right now? You have...
I think over 100, but I've got like loads more to add. Yeah,
I didn't even get very deep in there. But you have a couple of our friends from the podcast on there. I saw Waiki Wang's book. Who else did I see on there? Anyway, there's a lot of people that we've talked to that are on Zoe's website. So especially if you're in the UK, go check out juniperbythesea.com. And as I mentioned, you can always write to us at infatuasianpodcast@gmail.com and follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Infatuasian Podcast. And we'll put all of our guest details in the show notes so you can look that up. Follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Hey, you can give us a rating. Hey, stop what you're doing right now. Go give us Zoe, have you given us a rating yet? Go give us a rating.
Do you know what? I don't think I have. Yeah.
Come on, Zoe. You're on 2 episodes now. Give us 5 stars on Apple or Spotify, whatever you're listening on. Thank you, Zoe. So let's see. On behalf of Sarah-SoonLing, Zoe, and myself, we hope that you're all happy, healthy, and safe out there. Until we talk to you again, thanks for listening. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
You want to say bye, Sarah?
Bye.